Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Pivot here on Hilal TV. South Africa is a beautiful country with beautiful people. We have a diversity that is celebrated and recognized. We have a people who are strong, brave and courageous, who've stood the test of time. They have now come together to stand in solidarity for Palestine. But within this wonderful, intricate web, a tapestry of people, there also lies very many complicated issues, difficulties, challenges, and discriminations. To talk about that today, I have with me a wonderful person, a good friend, a long-time colleague, Jaco Oelofse, who is currently working as a history and philosophy lecturer in Vietnam. Jaco has focused his research in education by considering Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed through an Islamic perspective. He has been involved in social justice issues since his undergraduate years as a student and political activist, was actively involved in the Fees Must Fall movement in and around the Tshwane region by assisting students who were harassed by the police, university security, and the University of Pretoria students who were either arrested or detained by the police or faced expulsion for their involvement in the Fees Must Fall movement. His interests stem from ethical roots, especially as an Afrikaner in post-apartheid South Africa. He maintains that there is a particular responsibility on Afrikaners to fulfill their role in both material, spiritual, and moral preparations towards the historically disadvantaged majority of our nation. It is a conversation that I am looking forward to. For the Afrikaner people are dear to us. They are part of us. But with every community, there are issues that need to be addressed head on, and there are changes that need to be made. I would like to say, welcome, Jaco, and thank you for making this time.
Thank you so much, Quraisha. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jaco, you know, Afrikaners, the Afrikaans language, there is a love-hate relationship in South Africa for many of us in terms of how we've experienced Afrikaner people, the Afrikaans language, Afrikaner culture, Afrikaner food, and also the deep-seated traumatic memory of apartheid. As an Afrikaner, how do you feel, looking back at your history, looking at what is happening now in Palestine, and then understanding the role of Afrikaners in South Africa and their role towards Palestine?
Okay, so Quraisha, that's a very complicated question. I think you and I have been discussing that for quite some time. And it's not easy to answer, to be quite honest with you. I still don't have an answer to it, to be quite honest with you. I'm still looking for it in many, many ways. But let's get down to some of the things. In your introduction, I think you discussed something very important about, Afrikaans people. We are part of South Africa, we're woven into the tapestry of South Africa, whether some people like it or not. It's our country as well. We belong there. It's our home. My role and my relationship to my dear and beloved Afrikaans brothers and sisters is a complicated one. As I've often struggled to comprehend how many of them continue with a certain mentality in a post-apartheid South Africa that simply does not fit anymore. And I think recently, after I had a very long conversation with another colleague of mine at the Oxford University in the United Kingdom, he explained to me something very interesting. He said to me that Afrikaners have no choice but to accept the fact that firstly, they are part of South Africa, but to be part of South Africa, they need to change. And this change is going to be very profound, Quraisha, because, he said to me that they are caught in a nightmare. And I thought this was going to be one of those, we are the victims discussion, but he took it in an interesting twist. And he said to me that Afrikaners created this nightmare for themselves, and they are living their nightmare. One might even dare say that, I joked and said, if this is not maybe Allah's way of punishing them, because this is a nightmare that they created for themselves. They are stuck in it. They are constantly driven. And I don't want to generalize all Afrikaners, but from my experience, from observing a great deal of them over the many, many years, they are the crime is obviously a thing that affects all of us, but Afrikaners pretend that they are mostly affected by it, even when statistically and, scientifically speaking, it is not the fact. They are constantly driven by this idea that everybody is out to get them. They are wrecked with fear. They are wrecked by frustration. They are constantly worried about the economy. Same thing that all South Africans have, of course. But again, they have this unique victimhood of themselves being the ones that carry it the most, which I find very, bizarre, because it's not just them, but this nightmare that they can never escape. Even if you look at how many Afrikaners use their privilege that they have obtained throughout the many years and just simply, washed their hands with South Africa and said, we're done with this, we're going to leave. And how many, if not, millions of them left. And what did many of them do? They came back. So they can't escape this nightmare, It's just fascinating to me to observe how many of them fled to Europe and the United States and Australia, New Zealand, Canada. And then they realize, not so nice here, as my friend at Oxford said, because you can't oppress, you can't exploit there. You are just nobody there. You're just another white person in these countries. So they go back to South Africa, back into the nightmare they go. And constantly they have this own thing that they created hanging over their heads about the swart gevaar. And especially now with the elections around the corner. I've been telling many of my Afrikaner friends, if you truly wish to make the first attempt at a difference in South Africa, we all know that the ANC needs to go. We can't vote for the so-called Moonshot Pact either, because they are Israeli funded. They are racist, they are white supremacist. So I said, if you truly want to make a difference, vote for the EFF. And of course, they jump at this suggestion, going, oh, goodness, how could I vote for a political party that will just throw us into the sea? They hate us whites, they'll kill us. Now, I've watched several interviews of EFF members. I've listened to the commander-in-chief speak about this many times. And it's like, we've been around for nearly more than 10 years. We've done nothing to you. We're not going to take anything from you. Relax, just wait and see what will happen if we take over, but we're not going to do anything to you. And the fact that whenever we speak about Afrikaner people's privilege, their power, their historical role, and their victimhood that they always bring up, reverse apartheid, we are the new victims, apartheid has been reversed on us, they're all tropes, It is without a doubt reminiscent to what Israel is doing today. Right?
I was just going to say. Sorry, Jaco, I was just going to interrupt you there and say that so much of what you're saying is actually like sounding exactly as the same kind of mentality that the Zionists internalized: the fear, the victimhood, the belief that it's only them, everybody's out to get them, it's their land. What shall they do if they leave? The security concerns. It's a parallel story, the two running side by side.
Absolutely. And I think this is where the core, the crux of our discussion is boiling down to, is the parallels. Now, this is something I learned from my father when he said, the Zionists can teach us Afrikaners a thing or two about apartheid and colonialism and our roles that we historically played. The parallels are important, but we should also be careful with these parallels. Firstly, not to unfairly associate things that Afrikaners didn't do, because that would also take away responsibility from what the Zionists are up to. No matter the atrocities, and boy, did they commit atrocities, the Afrikaners, genocide was never on the table, seriously speaking, of course. Yes, some of the lunatics in the Nationalist Party and the Conservative Party did consider, some styles of ethnic cleansing in the apartheid regime. But if you think about it, they never had the numbers, the resources, the ways of doing it. Whereas the Zionists, the parallel needs to be done carefully. Their apartheid is even better than the apartheid of the Afrikaners. Their oppression, their ethnic cleansing, their ethno-nationalism, their policies, their role, their maneuvering in international politics is far more sophisticated and greater than that of the Afrikaners. I think the Afrikaners were actually just, as my dad said, they were just a bunch of hillbillies in comparison to the Zionists. And the Zionists have been doing this for far longer, and they have become incredibly efficient at it to a a nightmarish level. So we need to definitely pull the parallels. Let's start off with the victimhood thing, right? And for me, it is the crossroad of history that we're facing here. From my own religious perspective, I like to think that Allah has drawn a very fine line throughout all humans on earth regarding Palestine. This is a very, very peculiar matter because whether you are a Muslim or a Christian, a Jew, a Buddhist, or a non-believer, whatever you want to call yourself, if you do not find any issue with what is happening in Palestine, then you really need to stop, sit down, and reflect deeply about what is happening, no matter what your arguments are regarding the Zionists' right to do what they're doing. They have no right to do what they're doing. There's no defense for what they are doing in any possible way, in any moral or political or ethical explanation. There's no explanation or justification for what they're doing.
So, Jaco, we're almost at the end.
We're
almost at the end of this particular segment, and I just want to...
Okay, so let's get down to the point I'm trying to say is that, when Naledi Pandor specifically made her speech in Parliament a few months ago about Palestine, she was very particular about why South Africa as a government, as a nation, the ANC, and all South Africans should throw their weight behind the Palestinians. I agreed. And I even said that the Afrikaners themselves have an opportunity here, that we can another parallel line be drawn with the Germans. Now, the Germans, I strongly believe, are thrice condemned now. Genocide in Namibia, which they still deny and will not apologize or pay reparations for. Then the Holocaust, which they orchestrated and paid immensely for it. They are so paralyzed by their guilt for it that they are now assisting another genocide, and they will continue doing so. But we Afrikaners have an opportunity. We can actually, from this position, prevent our third condemnation for ourselves. By standing at this crossroad, we can choose to throw ourselves 100% behind Palestine. And I think we should. Not only will we have been giving ourselves an opportunity for redemption in South Africa, in the eyes of fellow South Africans, as you said, we're a difficult group of people to like. So this is an opportunity for us to reclaim our humanity, I believe, in relation to our fellow South Africans, ourselves, which is such an important role for us. As Paulo Freire said, how does the oppressor reclaim their humanity? And the Afrikaners haven't done the work. They haven't sat down and did the work of reflecting about our role in apartheid. And coming to terms to what we did, and materially and spiritually and morally fixing this.
So I have
Palestine
to stop.
Offers us
that
line.
I have to stop you there. We're going to a break. When we come back, we will talk a little further.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the second segment of Pivot, today with my very special guest, Jaco Oelofse. And we're talking about the role of Afrikaners in South Africa, the role of Afrikaners in the Palestinian conflict, and how they perceive themselves now in this 2024 elections going forward. Is it going to be a South Africa that stands for justice, for equality for all, for the rights of all human beings? Or are the Afrikaners going to do what the Germans have been doing, continuously support a genocide? Have the Afrikaners in South Africa matured from their nightmare of the past, and are they prepared to forge forward a new and better way, recognizing that apartheid simply is just not the way to go? Genocide is perhaps the most brutal of all crimes, and that they cannot associate themselves with these sophisticated but barbaric criminals in the Zionist apartheid state of Israel. Jaco, when we went to the break, you gave a beautiful description of how Afrikaners need to pull themselves together and to reevaluate their position. But coming to the elections, and you clearly stated that the Moonshot Pact is not something that they should participate in because it is a manifestation of white supremacy. But can you perhaps, just for the benefit of the audience, clarify this? Because many people would say, but there's mostly black parties in this moonshot pact, and it's only the DA really speaking, and maybe Vryheidsfront Front, who is, the white kind of parties, but the rest are all black South Africans. So they perhaps don't understand this whole notion of white supremacy and how it acts out even amongst black people.
Right. So let's start with that question directly. Yes, the DA is definitely unapologetically Zionist, and we are also aware that funding to the party comes from Zionism. And in Afrikaans, they have a very powerful saying, Croatia, meng jouself met die varke, meng jouself met die semels en dan vreet die varke jou op, which means if you're going to mix yourself with pig feet, don't be surprised if the pigs are going to devour you. So it's the same concept. If these parties associate themselves with a party that is funded and very unapologetic about their support for Zionism and their stance against Palestine, then your vote will go for that. It's quite logical. When I said white supremacist, I also want to specifically explain about the role of Zionism. And I think it's very important to point out that it's not just Afrikaners or white South Africans that are problematically associating themselves with Zionism. The South African Christian Democrat Party, Action SA, what's that party of McKenzie? Bosasa, I think. These parties are also associated with it. The South African Christian Zionist Church, which is mostly black South Africans who are part of this church, are also pro-Israeli. It comes from this bizarre concept of Zionism inside the Christian faith, which for me baffles me. So let's talk about that, because I think it will answer your question in both ways. Number one, for the Afrikaners, and number two, for the general South African population. The South Africans are mostly Christians. So, it is a question as a Muslim I would ask many Christians would be like, how does this work? Firstly, if we understand Zionism is a modern nationalist political movement that was born in Europe, created by Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was an atheist, and he was ethnically European Jewish, sure, but he believed in this idea of that the Jews had a right to their own state that was born from anti-Semitism because of the way that Europeans, from both after the birth of nationalism, during the age of nationalism in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was born. As we saw, it culminated into the German nationalist movement in Nazi Germany, and also the long historical relationship between Christians and their anti-Semitic view towards Jewish people. Wiping out entire Jewish communities going back all the way to the Roman Empire. This was very normal. Jewish people was quite used to it. And I personally believe that Theodor Herzl feeded off the hate of Europeans towards the Jewish people of Europe, because if that hate towards Jewish people was not there, his nonsense idea of a Israeli state could not exist. Now, we could for hours discuss about the theological problematics about creating the state of Israel, as we know that Allah has forbidden this. But if we continue with this thing, firstly, Palestine was never originally Theodor Herzl's goal. He had no romantic connection to the Holy Land because he was an atheist. He would have chosen Argentina. Even Uganda was on the table, for crying out loud. So what we need to look at is how this political movement was created, mutated, and eventually it was implanted as a corruptive infection into Orthodox Judaism. And then it hijacked this ideal, this religion, this faith. And we see this why? Because the Orthodox Jews today are strongly anti-Israel. And they oppose it vehemently, as much as those who see the barbarism that we see in Israel. We see that they also stand with the free peoples of the world to oppose this type of barbaric behavior. Now, let us quickly move on to answer the question even deeper. If you're a Christian in this regard, aren't you supposed to oppose the entire idea of the creation of the state of Israel, the so-called creation of the third temple? In their own scriptures, it is written there, right? So I will, for example, look and say here that if you support Zionism amongst the Israelis, and you consider yourself a Zionist Christian, that would be blasphemy in the Christian faith. I'm not even going to play around with that. It's blasphemy in your own faith. Because let's look at it. Their religion, specifically a prophet Isa, Jesus, peace be upon him, said that, isn't he the new temple? Right? That was the question I asked myself when I was reflecting on this. In their own religion, in the New Testament, I think it is in the Gospels of John, it specifically said that the Word became flesh. So the temple was reborn through Jesus for the Christians, of course. And it even uses in the Greek translations the word tabernacle, the tent and the veil of it all was used. So Jesus would be that for the Christians. Now, moving on in the same Gospels of John, chapter 2, it specifically says there that he will raise the temple within 3 days after he said, you should knock down this temple and I shall raise it in 3 days. The Jews said, but this is impossible because we built it in 43 days. And it was all obviously figuratively speaking, because Jesus said, well, according to the Christians, John, the author, would say that Jesus would be the new temple. So if they are then saying that the state of Israel should exist based on their faith as Christians, then they should also then support their Zionist political and their corruptive idea that the third temple should be built. And that would then go against their own teachings, which it does not. Because it continues in John 2, verse 22, that he says, those who deny this, the author of the Gospel of John would say, is the Antichrist, right? So it just doesn't make any sense to me, Gracia, because how the Christians, follow the teachings of Jesus, and if you just look at the teachings of Jesus and you look at what the Israelis are doing, genocide, that would contradict it, firstly, based on a purely humanistic moral view of how a Christian should behave. And then secondly, it goes against their own scriptures of the Christian faith. So I would pose this question to Afrikaners who are associating themselves with the Zionist movement from their own Christian faith, because they usually rely on this one single argument of Genesis 12, verse 3. It specifically says that, if you those who do not bless the descendants of Prophet Abraham and they curse him, God will curse them. So, of course, it's up for debate again, and that would be for another interview. But I'm like, guys, is that your main argument? That's it? But everything in your faith contradicts this. So now, to answer the question about voting, if we remove the theological discussion from this, and I think I made quite a profound argument for it, why they are behind it. I think this is the essence why Christians in the Afrikaner community are pro-Israeli, and why a lot of Christian South Africans are, whether they are white or Afrikaans or black or whatever they are. And this is their arguments they make. They believe that the Jews are the chosen people. But even their own scripture says it's not. So you don't need to be a Muslim. And this is not me speaking. This is not our Quran or our hadiths or whatever. This is the teachings of the Christians. So voting this year in the South African political realm is most certainly a spiritual, moral, and political responsibility that we all need to observe very, very carefully. We firstly know that the ANC, despite their more courageous actions that they've taken on an international stage lately, it's commendable, but too little, too late. The ANC needs to go. This is clear. So if we can't vote for them, and we can't vote for the collection of the Moonshot Pact, then who do we vote for? I'm not going to answer that question. We're all free to choose who we want to vote for.
So, Jaco,
but it is not an easy one to answer.
Yeah, now we're at the end. We just have basically a minute or so left. And I want to ask you that, considering all of this, isn't it possible then that it's not only religious that is making the Zionist Afrikaners vote in favor of, parties that support or endorse the apartheid state of Israel, but that there is a deep-seated, ingrained racism within them, still the belief that the white is superior to the black?
Absolutely. We can never deny this, and I simply base my answer on the fact that the Afrikaners were never given the opportunity, to be fair to them as well, as the Germans did, to denazify, to actually come to terms what they've done. So yes, this is there, but I would also say that, of course, Afrikaners have in many ways changed. A lot of, especially the young Afrikaners, who grew up without this nationalist nonsense in their minds and in their hearts. Yes, this is a role, without a doubt. But Gracia, I'll be honest with you, and I don't want to sound like I'm stuck on it, but religion is a profound reason this is happening and why they would be against it. The fact that the Palestinians are brown-skinned Muslims is the problem as well. And to convince an Afrikaner that is white-skinned, coming from a history of white supremacist racism in South Africa, to suddenly be behind a brown-skinned Muslim, yeah, that's going to be a tough one. But hey, we should do it. We should. Afrikaners must do the hard work. They must. I hope I can do my part for it as an Afrikaner.
I'm sure you will. Thank you so much, Jaco. We're at the end of the interview, and I can't speak to you for hours, but I'm going to definitely bring you back so that we can talk some more. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much.
Wa rahmatullah.